other opposition activists are in jail, and there are a number of them that we can be fairly certain that they are not going to survive this either. And a number of them, including Vladimir Kara-Murza, have been sentenced to given very long prison sentences, ridiculously long considering what they are accused of, and it's not going to end well for them.
Human rights group has told the Times that Alexei Navalny was likely to have been killed by a punch to the heart after being exposed to freezing conditions for several hours. Vladimir Osechkin from Gulagu.net says bruising found on Mr. Navalny's body is consistent with a technique which was taught to KGB special forces. Meanwhile, his widow, Yulia Navalnaya, has called on her fellow Russians to use every opportunity to fight against Vladimir Putin's regime. We're joined now by Elisabeth Braw, the Russia expert and fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Morning, Elizabeth.
Good morning.
I mean, it is almost impossible to get an absolutely categorical, factual position out of the Russian prison system. But what do you make of the claims that Navalny could have died in this way?
It is an interesting suggestion. And the point, though, is that we can never believe what the Russian government says anymore. And this is a very unfortunate situation, not just with regards to the war in Ukraine, but also with regard to anything the Russian government says. You want to be able to believe what a government says. And here we are. We don't even know how Alexei Navalny died. And we will see lots of suggestions like this. It sounds plausible, but because nobody has seen his body, it's impossible to tell what actually happened to him.
Can you be as confident as anyone can be that he was murdered by the state? I mean, can we conclude at least that, do you feel?
Well, what is clear is that he was in the custody of the state, and something happened to him that caused him to lose his life. And unfortunately, because the Russian authorities have developed this habit of obfuscating or being economical with the truth, whatever they say, even if they end up saying the truth, most people won't believe that it is the truth they are saying. And we should remember this is not some underdeveloped country with a questionable record of telling the truth. It is a major power that has descended to these depths where people within the country and indeed outside the country are fairly confident that whatever comes out of the Russian authorities is not the truth.
And the point is made here in the stories on the front of the Times this morning, that he'd been forced to spend more than 2.5 hours in open-air solitary confinement where temperatures could fall to minus 27. I mean, that is effectively killing someone. He was given, the widow was given a note from the government saying he died of sudden death syndrome, which, of course, just sounds ridiculous in those circumstances. What does this mean, do you feel, for the future of opposition in Russia? Because there was an inevitability about this, wasn't there? We all, when he went missing at the end of the year, we thought, oh, something could have happened to him. It never felt this was going to end in any other way than this, which means effectively that the opposition in Russia is being eliminated in plain sight. That just means that Putin, the dictator Putin, carries on with no opposition, effectively.
And what it does mean is that other opposition activists are in jail, and there are a number of them that we can be fairly certain that they are not going to survive this either. And a number of them, including Vladimir Kara-Murza, have been sentenced to given very long prison sentences, ridiculously long considering what they are accused of, and it's not going to end well for them. It's a tragic state of affairs, and I have to say it's reminiscent of very ugly days in Russian or Soviet history. Not even the Soviets in the 80s dared to do things like this, where prisoners were allowed to die. This is something that happened in darker days of the Soviet Union in the 30s and 40s. 30s in particular, but later Soviet leaders would never have dared to allow a prisoner to die this openly, and because they had a sense of shame, and apparently those currently in charge do not have a sense of shame.
That's such a good point. Just finally, feels like Putin is in a stronger position than he was 2 years ago when the war in Ukraine began. That started, immediately went wrong for him. And then there was a year really where things looked like might be wobbling for President Putin. There's an election of sorts this year. The war in Ukraine has hit stalemate. He's certainly not losing it in the way he was the year before. Could we be facing President Putin for 5 more years, 10 more years? Does he feel as solid as ever, do you think, in his role?
I think what this teaches us in the West is that we shouldn't engage in wishful thinking.
Yeah.
When Russia invaded Ukraine, and it didn't go the way Russia had hoped. We in the West said, well, now the Russian population is going to, Russians are going to turn against him because they are not going to like a long war, and it's going to be difficult for them because they can't get the consumer goods they want. It hasn't turned out this way. The war clearly is still going on, which is not what Putin wanted, but the population has not turned against him, and this really suggests that we don't understand them properly, or that his hold on them is much stronger than we would like to think. So it teaches us not to declare victory over Putin when he looks weak the next time,
Yeah.
because he has survived crises before and being counted out by us in the West, and he has come back, and he may do it again.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Elizabeth, good to speak to you. Thank you for joining us today. That's Elisabeth Braw, the Russia expert, fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, interestingly saying that earlier communist leaders had shame in a way that Vladimir Putin does not.